welcome to the Generative AI session. Great to have you here. Does anybody know what Generative AI is? Maybe you've heard of this stuff? Well, I've heard of this stuff, and I've been learning about it, and I've been studying about it. And I'm Ilya. I'm Principal Data Scientist at Phenom. This is Kumar, Head of Product. We're going to tell you how we're thinking at Phenom about some of the generative AI technologies that are coming on the market and how we're integrating them for you, making them work for you in a practical, sensible, useful way. So this is what we're going to talk about. I'll give you a quick intro to generative AI. Kumar will take over with the other two topics. So mission at Phenom, helping 1 billion people find the right job, right? You might have heard that a couple of times today or prior to today. Generative AI is this strange new world that we're entering, right? If you go back into the history of the modeling that makes this possible, it goes back to the 1970s, maybe earlier. This is, at its core, just stats, just statistics. But practical applications of it are new and really fun and really creative. So the way that I like to think about introducing this topic is that it helps you create rather than the old-fashioned kind of things that we used to use AI for. So this is showing up in a bunch of products from a bunch of vendors. Google is building this, Microsoft is building this, not just like into search engines, like for example, Bing famously has this feature now, but also into the Office suite. So these are productivity tools that are going to show up everywhere, that are showing up already. And not just these two vendors, many, many others also. This is really transforming workflows. Is it transforming workflows for everyone? Not literally everyone. But it's transforming them in a way that the previous generation of AI technologies did not. So you might have heard about job zones. Job zones are a notion out of ONET, which is a taxonomy out of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics at the US Department of Labor. And what you have here on the horizontal axis is the percentage of tasks that people engage in some occupation. And each of the colored bands corresponds to one of the 5 job zones in ONET. And what you see is that if you're here in the green, maybe you are in job zone 1. Maybe you are, I don't know, laying bricks. ChatGPT is not going to do much for somebody laying bricks. But if you are engaged in creative work, if you're creating text or video or audio or images, if you are a creative producer of stuff, if you're in job zone 4 or 5, as many as half of your tasks or more could be affected in some way by these new generative AI models. It's variable, it depends on the occupation, but this is, hot off the presses academic research from some folks working with OpenAI. So here's a little demo. If you haven't seen ChatGPT in action, you can ask it for stuff, right? It's a chatbot, is one user experience, one way of exposing these models. And so you might ask a question, and it's going to spin its wheels for a second, and it's going to produce them for you. So this is a neat thing that the model just already knows off the top of its head, so to speak. You can punch in a query to generate some images. That's a thing that's already out there today. You can punch in a query to generate code, right? So computer scientists are building things that make computer science and software engineering be completely different. In about 5 minutes, scientifically speaking, if you're a software engineer that is not using one of these models, then you're falling behind your colleagues who are using these models. This is going to turn writing code completely upside down. But to make this useful for you, we need to contextualize it. We need to take all of these fancy technologies that are coming from the different vendors, and we need to somehow contextualize them in data that are relevant to you.
All right. So we know that this is a disruptive technology, and we know that we have to build products and software that use this technology and bring that power of generative AI to you. But when we thought about how we need to really build it, we thought about context as being the most critical aspect, right? So if you look at context, so you can have a job description that's generated from ChatGPT, and you can just copy and paste it and post it out there. But does it represent your brand? Is it bias free? Does it represent your company culture? Is it including some of the context that you have as a company into that equation? The answer is no. So we have to think about how we need to contextualize generative AI in various contexts. So we spoke about job zones 1 and 2, right? So where there is not much application for generative AI there could be some aspects of a generative AI, but mostly it's an automation use case. Now you come to job zones 3, 4, and 5, where we have a lot more context, a lot more use cases that we can understand and apply this technology to. So that's the whole aspect of contextualization. So this is zones that we worked with. The second context is we also need to understand our user. So if a talent acquisition leader is trying to ask a question about application conversions, the answer is a little bit different than somebody who's just doing talent analytics, right? So the context, the org structure is also important to be considered in the product design before we deliver this capability to you. And what we do is we've been building graphs for you over the last 10 years. So any customer that we deploy our software, we generate a contextual graph, we call that as an enterprise talent graph, that establishes these contexts for us that's able to really power the generative AI use case into our product, right? So these are some of the important fundamentals that we need to have in place before we introduce new capability into the platform. With this context, this is really what we think of, right? So you have the core foundational AI, which is the ChatGPT, GPT-4, Bard, and others that are out there. And this is the specialized model that we are adding on top of it. So this is really how we think of the stack of capabilities that we'll have to build before we build that software out. And with this context, we have a pretty amazing set of capabilities that we've already launched with our products. Let's walk you through some of those. So the first use case that we thought about is, this is the candidate sourcing use case. Simple example is generating a job description, right? So you can go to your CRM, you can say, hey, help me generate a job description. All you need is the title. So you put in your title, your location. The system automatically understands what your context is, and it's trying to find all other similar job titles that you've opened in the past, job descriptions, tries to mine that. It also gets data from skills, requirements from hiring managers, recruiters, and really uses all of that and ultimately ends up generating a job description that's very specific to your company, right? So this is one example of what we do. And this is just not one use case, right? Think of email personalization. So you're constantly talking to your candidates as recruiters, and you need to just write emails. Yeah, ChatGPT can probably draft your email, but how do you contextualize it for the status of the candidate in this example? So, for example, if there's a candidate who's returning or a repeat applicant but was previously rejected, and now you have to probably re-invite this candidate back to a new job, the type of email that you're going to send to them is different from, let's say, somebody who's right on your career site, who's really interested in your job and they're ready to pick it up. So based on that context, we can generate email depending on what candidates you choose. So this is another example of where we've used generative AI. We have gone into a bunch of task simplification as a use case with generative AI, right? So if you look at the screen, sorry, I'm not able to see my screen here, so I have to turn around. So if you look at the screen, you can add a note. So typically you're talking to your candidates, you're adding notes, and here's a note to say, let's discuss with this hiring manager at 10 a.m. tomorrow. It understands that context and automatically adding a notification or task reminder for you to say, hey, we are going to look and follow up on this particular note, right? So this is an example of how you can really drive that efficiency back to your recruiters, where just by doing the most core aspects in the platform, we can automate a lot of other things based on this technology. Then after the sourcing aspect, we went to a bunch of screening. So if you look at interview scheduling, right? So we've developed a bot, so to speak, on the recruiter experience. So if you think about how you typically take actions within your ATS or CRM, whatever may be the case. You find the candidate or you find the job, you click into it, you find the candidate, click into the candidate, then click on some button to initiate an action, you navigate through a menu, you click on something else, and then the action happens. But you have a lot of context that's built in the bot itself. So we are looking at task simplification from that perspective. So this bot, you can just go in and say, hey, add a note on this candidate's profile or schedule a 30-minute interview with John. Because the recruiter is working on a rec, and that rec is coming from a specific hiring manager who is John, even though we don't know the full name, we are able to still schedule that interview without doing anything, right? So that's an example where context really comes into effect and really makes lives easier for the recruiter, right? Adding a note. So this is something that we constantly hear about, right? So you have to go and add a note on the candidate. So we saw a demo where after you add a note, you can actually create a task. Here, you can just tell the bot to go and add some notes. It's going to click and add those notes. You can expand, you can shorten it, you can fine tune it, do whatever you want, but it's as simple as that. So instead of learning how to use a particular software, you're just interacting with it naturally as if you're talking to a colleague. So we took some of those design principles in the product and we've built some of those aspects here, right? Hiring manager, this is interesting, right? So hiring managers conduct all these interviews. They have a bunch of candidates they interview, but they hate to write feedback. So you have to follow up and have them write. So this whole capability can really be used to just take quick notes on the candidate during the interview, for example, and start using the power of generative AI to really fine-tune that, right? So I can just say, hey, here are the total topics that we spoke about on the interview. This is my feedback. Just have bullet points out there, and generative AI is going to help generate this feedback, right? Obviously, it's not automatically submitted. It's available for review, but here's a use case where it really helps even managers save their times, and it's going to indirectly help us to get feedback from managers to make faster decisions. So these micro interactions that happen on a day-to-day perspective that are probably not the best experience, we are completely simplifying that with generative AI. So we did the screening aspects and the selection, right? So within Phenom, we have a video product, so you can really have a video questionnaire that gets generated and send a video assessment to your candidates. They can record a video asynchronously and send some of those responses back. And typically to do that, when you're setting up your rec, you need the list of those interview questions, right? So those interview questions is sometimes maybe not easy to generate. You may have a very generic one that you send it to all candidates, but it may not be very contextualized. It may not be digging deeper into what the candidate is all about. So now what we've built is based on what questions are being asked previously, what type of candidates you're looking at, based on that context, we can automatically generate all questions for a required interview. So this could be used as an interview guide, it could be used from a video assessment perspective. It's all automatically generated. So depending on what type of role that you're hiring for and what are the relevant questions for your enterprise, depending on what skill gaps are there in the team, the questions are generated. So now you can use this as a starting point and start building out that framework, right? And we have a big section on interview intelligence. This is a key area that we've been focusing on quite a bit. So here, from an interview intelligence perspective, a lot of interviews are happening virtually now, right? So you have your Zoom, your Microsoft Teams, your Google. We have the ability to record that interview, really transcribe that interview, and have AI generate insights. Obviously, we're not going to do any facial recognition, things like that, but just this transcript, the audio, how can we basically use that audio and really transcribe and provide some intelligence is something that we've already deployed. So based on the video interview, you can quickly summarize, you can get the whole transcript, teams can annotate, they can look at highlights and lowlights, they can have AI insights that talk about what are the key topics that were discussed. Here, it's an example of collaboration. So for example, you have a transcript and a candidate said something and you're not really sure if you can make an offer decision based on what they said, but you don't want to take a decision on your own. You want to tag your team member or your manager to say, hey, what do you think about this comment? And now you can collaborate and make a decision on that candidate, right? So this is an example of where we've used generative AI. We also have use cases to use this from a training perspective. So we can look at all the summaries that are happening. The AI automatically summarizes the interview if the recruiter wants to see what happened, the list of questions that were asked by the candidate versus the manager or the interviewer. And now you can also use this as a training exercise to see what type of questions people are asking during my interview. Are they asking questions that shouldn't be asked? And use this really as a training exercise. And there are also certain insights that we've developed on this platform that help both recruiters and interviewers to really improve their style of interviewing, right? So there are certain insights about their talking speed, how many times they interrupted the candidate and things like that, that can be feedback back to the hiring manager to say, hey, these are certain things that you can avoid and things like that. So here are really some high-level use cases of what we've deployed in our product today. So these are just simple examples, but there are tons that you'll see tomorrow morning as a part of our product keynote as well. All right, Ilya, back to you.
Yeah, so as I think about where this is going to go, right, it's kind of hard to say. The technology is moving very quickly. The company that makes some of these models, the most famous company perhaps, called OpenAI, they've multiplied their model size tenfold every few months, basically, right? So the capabilities of these models are growing very, very rapidly, and stuff that is very hard to conceive of for a computer to do today might actually be pretty feasible tomorrow, right? I mean, we're not talking about this, little crazy machine becoming sentient. That is not happening. But there's a kind of a creative challenge that we have at Phenom to identify, well, if we have these new resources that we can tap, and if we can layer them with contextual data from your organizations, from the labor market at large, how do we, with your workflows, how do we really make these workflows effective and efficient and as delightful as possible, really, for all of the stakeholders? This is really the final thought that I want to share with you as a kind of a framing task, not task, suggestion, as you think about getting into generative AI, right? Think about this question, right? What would you do if you had a writing assistant, right? If you had a fairly trained, fairly expert human who could perform a writing task for you and could put together like a reasonable, decent first draft of something. Those two words, first draft, are very, very important. It's actually in sync with our vision that AI in production needs to have a human in control. It's the human in the loop kind of metaphor. We're not trying to put the AI in a position where it's actually making decisions for your candidates, for your workflows. In high stakes decisions in HR come up all of the time. We would not want to delegate that to a machine. But if you sort of know which way the decision is going to go, and if you want to put together a message about that decision, whether it's an email, whether it's a job description, whether it's a note, whether it's an interview summary, whether it's a whatever piece of writing, that's a good first starting point for thinking about this set of technologies, with you, the human, in control of what these things are doing as they are putting together a first draft for you. I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to, we saved a couple of minutes on purpose because some of this stuff is so new, some of it is so confusing, that if you have questions about generative AI, now is probably a reasonable time to raise those, and I'm happy to entertain questions, and I'm sure Kumar is also. The short of it is, these technologies are evolving very, very rapidly. I'm very excited as a computer scientist, as an AI scientist, I'm very excited for what the future holds. We are keeping a very close eye on the ethical ramifications of this, right? So as we develop AI technologies at Phenom, this is not willy-nilly, thank you kind of stuff. And need human AI on occasion. Right, so this is another framework around generative AI that is not going to be exposed to users directly very, very soon, but as we are experimenting with new use cases, right? This is a chatbot. So, I could possibly type in here. Let's see, I don't know if this works. For the Phenom tenant, how many applications did we receive?
Phenomenal, I think.
Yeah, let's try that. And let's maybe fix the spelling error. It's going to think for a second, and maybe we loaded the right data, or maybe we didn't. In this case, we didn't. But in like 5 minutes, we will, right? So data from all of the tenants on the platform, gradually, in a data-secure, privacy-protecting kind of way, that is segmented for your enterprise only and not mixed together with other companies, will become available to be a subject of chat, a subject of dialogue with a system, right? And some of these use cases that we discover from you, that we discover from customers, that we discover from design kind of conversations, will make their way into the platform. You will see them. Some of them may just appear gradually. Oh, this is a new feature for you. Some may some may require a special conversation with your account manager or customer value manager to make that available to you. But workflows are changing rapidly, and I'm super excited for what this future holds. Please.
Are you guys using like OpenAI technology, or are you guys using like That's question one. And then the second one is the chatbot that you showed, or some of the things you showed, is that available today to customers, and is it generated AI, or is it still the early days of chatbot where it's just there's a number of responses that you can generate?
Sure. So there's a two-part question. One, are we using something like a chat GPT, or are we having our in-house model, right? So we do something called an ensemble model. What that means is we have a lot of context and we've developed our own version. So what you're seeing here is our own version. It's a test tenant. We just wanted to quickly bring it up. We didn't set it up, but our own version can provide a lot of this context within our ecosystem. So we have one version of it. But depending on the confidence level, we have an approach to go after other large language models or LLMs. So in some cases, we do use ChatGPT to help us contextualize what the query, the intent is, but the actual answer is supposed to be coming through our systems. So we translate that. So it's kind of a combination of the models, some of the context that we already have and some of the ones that we use with that context to the large language models. And in terms of availability, all the features that I showed to you is actually already deployed. So if you're a customer and you want to try this out, feel free to contact your CVM, and we can enable it for you in a test environment for you to play with. Yeah.
So that's going to be my question. That was going to be my question. I think it's amazing and super cool. For clients who maybe aren't ready for it, it sounds like it can be disabled or it has to be proactively enabled. Is that always going to be the case? There'll always be an opportunity to turn it off if you want?
Absolutely. So we are not going to turn it off for anyone. So the models are there. They are being refined. They are being adjusted. It's very early access. If you want to try it out, maybe in a staging environment, we can turn it on to see how that looks. Happy to get feedback on what you're experiencing. That will help us refine it as well, but this is not enabled by default. Yep.
So a follow-on to that, is anybody using it today, and have you gotten any feedback on it? Like, how's it working? I mean, because I think about talent acquisition organizations, and a lot of us aren't technologists, and this is really complicated from my perspective. So I'm just wondering what kind of feedback you've gotten from the end users.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. We are announcing all of this in this conference today. So you are one of the first earlier ones that are getting access to this. And we'll start to enable it. We'll hear feedback, and we'll follow suit. There are certain use cases where absolutely it makes a lot of sense. In certain cases, maybe it can help, but maybe there's a different context that we may have to add and iterate on. So this is really our first version.
And this is going to be last question, I think, here.
I got it.
Hi, I just wanted to know, is there any plan to bring this onto the chatbot, like the career site-facing chatbot at all? Either to help us generate answers for FAQ questions or anything like that?
That's a great question, and you hit the nail on the head. So these are some of the use cases that we showed quickly, but we've built the chatbot that already analyzes everything that's there on your career site and automatically answers your FAQs so that you don't have to do that. If you want us to automatically publish, we can publish with the tag AI generated so that the candidate knows that, hey, this is not reviewed, it's an AI generated content, only if there's a certain high threshold. But you have the ability to take a look at all your unanswered questions on the bot and see the AI generated response and tweak it and publish it as well. That's a great question.
One more?
Yeah.
Okay.
As you enable this in your tenant, do you foresee a way for it to kind of learn from the particular tenant and give responses back that are more on brand for your company rather than just kind of generalized?
Absolutely. So that was really the core design principle of how we built it, right? We are not using any chat GPT as is, for example. right? So if the demo that you showed where a job description was getting generated or an email was getting generated, that was all based on your data. So if two people in your own team send an email to a candidate, the initial draft that gets generated is based on their context as well, right? So it's highly contextual to the user, to the candidate, to the company, and everything is on brand.
All right, I think we'll wrap up.
Yep.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
your
everyone.
questions.